So, welcome everybody. This is the Sunday afternoon call, uh, primarily designed for those in the UK, a Sunday morning. Uh, where is Dean? Dean was here a minute ago. I don't see. Oh yeah, he's got his window off. Yeah, he's in the UK. Ben, where are you located?
I'm from the
Harvard.
UK, but I'm currently in Vietnam.
You're in Vietnam, all right. What was that, Dean?
I'm in a place called Tipperary in Ireland.
All right. Anna, are you still in France?
Yes, I'm in France.
All right. And Ivan is in Malaysia, and Michael is here, and David is at Wat Suan Mok. So we've got a collection of folks that are in Thailand and Malaysia and Vietnam, as well as in Europe. So today, someone has asked me about Vic Buddhadasa, and that uh, basically the better thing to talk about is him and his life rather than me and what I got from him. Hello, Kat. Welcome. Kat's also in Thailand and Royette.
Hello, what's the crack? Hello.
So, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was quite revolutionary in Thailand. That for many, many centuries, because of, let us say, some politics, especially around the Brahmins, that the Brahmins really were disgusted with the teachings of the Buddha because it cost them their livelihood. Why? Because the Buddha taught that anybody can do it and that only you can do it for yourself. And yet the Brahmins, like the Christian preachers, making huge amounts of money off of funerals and blessings and all kinds of things. And they eventually teamed up with the Moguls from the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, and they wiped out Buddhism in Thailand, or actually in India mostly. And that when they wiped it out, what that meant was a huge number of monks disrobed, a huge number of them left the area, left the country, and that there was nothing much left. They even went so far, by the way, as to dig up every root that they could find of the Bodhi tree to make sure that they destroyed it. They destroyed the Nalanda University, and among other things, they killed about somewhere between 80 and 100 million people and chopped down all the trees basically in India, leaving it barren. So, with that in mind, the Buddhists that were left decided that maybe it's not a good idea to teach openly the liberation that the Buddha taught. And so it kind of went underground. Now, in that regard, what I mean is that within the Buddha Sangha, within the group of monks, they let anyone join, but only someone who asks the right question at the right time to the right person would actually get the right answer. And everybody else who were asking the wrong questions at the wrong time to the wrong people never got into what the Buddha actually taught. Now, what happened with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was is that by reading the sutras and reading the Pali and studying it well, he began to unravel it. And as he did, he started teaching publicly. And as he did, he made enemies. And they put him up on charges. The charges actually, by the way, is called a Sangha, and what that means is the breaking up or the decease of the Sangha. That he was trying to destroy the Sangha is what they were saying, by teaching actually what the Sangha was all about. Well, in the trial, he had some friends, because the ones who were in the trial were in both groups, those who didn't really have a clue about what the Buddha taught, even though they were senior monks, and those that really understood, because that tradition had been kept alive. And so basically, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was one of the kinds of people that stumbled onto asking the right questions at the right time to the right people by getting into trouble. Now, in this trial, one of the things that's quite amazing that happened is that there actually was a very, very detailed literature search, because Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was making statements that, let us say, ruffled feathers. And so some of the things that he was saying is that the Buddha only taught one kind of practice, one form of meditation, because in the Vadi Maga and in other literature, they have a list of 40 meditations. And all of the ordinary monks were going around thinking that the Buddha taught 40 meditations, though in fact he only taught one, which was Anapanasati. There was also a lot of issues on the definitions of the words. But one of the things that did happen is that he made some good friends, and one of them became his teacher. That monk's name was Achan Buddhadasa, who happened to have been the Samdet Sangharaj, the head monk of all of Thailand. And that he was appointed as that by, let us say, the king of Thailand, who also had been a monk for many years. His name was Wichan, and he was born in 1860 into the royal family. His father was King Mongut, and King Mongut has a history in Thailand of being quite noble. And so the point that I'm making is that the noble lineage of the Buddha actually was fairly close to the royal family. And so Bhikkhu Buddhadasa started making some good friends. In fact, he was a friend to the king of Thailand, even the most recent king, who died in 2016, actually visited Wat Suan Mok and put in a well. So Buddha Gosajarn became Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's teacher, and that one of the things that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa would not do was that the noble Sangha had been keeping the real teachings of the Buddha private and secret because of the dangers, just like he was in danger and he got through that. And so his point is to start teaching the real Dhamma openly. And that was what he did for basically the rest of his life. Also, during that time, you can see that he was himself going through various changes as he got, let us say, out of some of the lies that he had been told. An example of that, in fact, this is kind of an important point, is that even as he grew very old, he was still teaching things out of the Visuddhimagga that did not exist in the sutras. But he basically went south and became, let us say, disgusted with the Visuddhimagga. And in fact, at one time, he says that if the Abhidhamma and the Visuddhimagga and all the literature from those from that time was thrown into the ocean, that Buddhism would be better off. In other words, he was kind of believing in let's burn the books that have destroyed Buddhism. So when I arrived at Wat Suan Mok, I had actually found out about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa when I was in India. And the monk that I heard it from actually insisted that I go to see Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And at that time, I was staying at the Thai Wat in Bodh Gaya in India, and he saw that I was reading the Vadi Maga, and this monk actually took that book out of my hand. Now, in the old traditions of Buddhism, the books are sacred. You don't throw them around. You keep them careful because in the old days, literature was hard to come by. Now that we have printing presses, it's just a piece of paper. And that's the way that he did it. So I was quite surprised when he took that book away from me and he literally tossed it onto the wooden bed and insisted that I go meet Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. So that was in 1982, 83, that time period. And already by then, that showed that not only was Bhikkhu Buddhadasa quite against the Visuddhimagga, but he also was widely teaching that. This monk, by the way, happened to have been from Wat Chulapatan, which is a wat in Bangkok, and one of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's number one students was the abbot of Wat Chulapatan in Nonthaburi. And I've spent quite a lot of time also at that Wat. So this is an important point, is that a lot of the literature that has become part of the canon, part of Buddhist literature, some of it 1,500 to 2,000 years old, is actually not the teachings of the Buddha. You could also say that Buddhism kind of was in a really good shape up until about 300 BC. So for the first 100 to 150 years or so, Buddhism was pure. The teachings that the Buddha gave were widespread and well known. But King Asok actually established Buddhism as, let us call it, the royal religion, and let many, many people come in, gave them robes and bowls and housing and all of that. And what that caused is that the number of good monks who really understood the Dhamma were overwhelmed by all of these newbies that were coming in, bringing their own belief systems. And that we still, that's the predominance of Buddhism today, is all of the beliefs that came out of Hinduism. That word didn't actually exist, but Brahmanism and Jainism has had a major, major impact upon Buddhism for ordinary people. That in fact, in India, they consider Buddhism as just another part of Hinduism. In other words, they were successfully able to basically destroy it. But they didn't destroy it completely. They still left a small group who, over many, many centuries, kept passing down the real teachings of the Buddha. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa decided he's going to let that cat out of the bag. And so now the actual teachings of the Buddha are getting around. Let's stop for a moment. Amrit, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you said Bhikkhu Buddhadasa said about the Visuddhimagga and also Abhidhamma that they have caused harm to Buddhism. So I was aware of Visuddhimagga, but I was not aware of Abhidhamma before. So at least what I learned that Abhidhamma was composed during the time of Buddha. I don't know. Somebody said by Sariputta or something or.
Oh no, not nowhere near that. You would say, in fact, that the Buddha, that the Abhidhamma was kind of the last thing that was done that made it into the Tripitaka, including all the Chitaka Tales. Have you ever heard of the word Chitaka? Chitaka Tales? Actually, yes. The collection, the book, is about this thick. It's the very, very biggest, by far, biggest book in the Buddhist library. And it's a bunch of Brahmin myths and metaphors and stories about the Buddha's past life. Now, actually, they could have been stories about anybody, but they chose to say this is the Buddha's past life, in order to give it credence, as well as to keep the actual teaching of the Buddha under their thumb, trying to control it. That this is what the Visuddhimagga was doing. That it was much of what's in the Visuddhimagga. Vic Buddhadasa at one time says that 95% of the Visuddhimagga is correct. It's just that they change it at the last minute and poison it. It's almost like that they'll tell the entire story, but then change the moral of the story. And they do that in order to keep Buddhism as a religion rather than a freedom. That, in fact, I think everybody knows this, but I'll say it anyway. The word religion actually means to rebind, to make things together, to make it strong by making everybody believe the same stuff. So actually, religion is not freedom. When people are free, that means they're free to go and be anything and do anything that they want, but they are not free when they are in a religion, that you're bound to a set of beliefs, whether those beliefs are factual or not. So the Visuddhimagga has an interesting point about it. There is some literature that indicates that the guy who wrote it, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, knew that what he was putting into the Visuddhimagga was designed to destroy Buddhism. He knew that. Others will say that he was an idiot, a sophomore, a wise fool. In other words, he was wise enough to collect all of this literature to put it together in a book, but he didn't understand, he didn't have a clue about what he was teaching. But there is another view, is that of course he knew what he was teaching, but he was Brahmin, and he recognized that if the teachings of the Buddha really got out, his family was out of business. And so the Visuddhimagga has now become one of the predominant books throughout literature. I think, in fact, Anna, when she was in Sri Lanka, did they actually, let us say, relish the Visuddhimagga, put it high up there on some pedestal? They do that both in Sri Lanka and also in Burma.
Yeah, well, they didn't really taught me about that, but I could feel the influence, of course, in the teachings.
Yes, that's one of the places, for example, of the 16 stages of insight is in the Visuddhimagga, which basically, the way that it's stated, puts people through a really rough state. In the West, they even call it the dark night of the soul, but that's a completely erroneous way of discussing it. But people do, when they start seeing what's happening in their mind, they become disgusted, they become fearful, morose, and all of that. Where, in fact, the real teachings of the Buddha is to drop all of those kind of feelings and just be happy. And so this is basically the teachings of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, was to bring back the original teachings of the Buddha. But he was also dedicated to the Thai people, that he was a teacher of the Thai people. It was actually Aan Po who had a great deal of interest in Westerners. And so Aan Po became basically my primary teacher. And I have a great deal of respect for Aan Po. Even though he did not speak English hardly at all, he knew the Dhamma well enough that he could teach the Dhamma without language. I find that kind of amusing, since I speak a lot of language. I talk a lot. And that's because I don't have much of an opportunity to just teach the Dhamma the way that Aan Po taught it. Amrit, go ahead. You got your hand up.
Yeah. So another point, I was listening once biography of Vimla Ramsey. So he was talking about his own development, and he said he was practicing a lot in Burma, and he was practicing with the Visuddhimagga. But later on, actually, he come across the translation of the Suttas of Buddha. I think this was Bhikkhu Bodhi translation. And he also had this realization that he was practicing quite wrongly, and then he changed his practice. I think it's a little bit in parallel with what happened to Buddhadasa.
Yes, a lot of people, in fact, can read well, read correctly, and really understand what the real teachings of the Buddha are, so long as they're lucky enough to read the right stuff, rather than reading stuff that's misleading or irrelevant. And so most of the Majjhima Nikaya is actually quite useful, but a lot of it is irrelevant and misleading. That in fact, the oldest literature of all, the the Sutta Nipata and the Udana, tend to be the most accurate work of the Buddha, and that there's clear evidence that that stuff was actually written down during the lifetime of the Buddha, and the evidence has to do with the fact that the sutras were named. And so in the Anguttara Nikaya, they actually refer to sutras in the Sutta Nipata by name. And that's a good indication then that these were very old, where we know for sure that the Anguttara Nikaya, the Dinga Nikaya, and the Samyutta Nikaya were all written during the time of Ashoka, and the commentaries were written even later than that. And it was the Abhidhamma was written even later than that. So the real teachings of the Buddha can be found mostly in the Majjhima Nikaya, in the Sutta Nipata, and in the Udana. These are the real good places to find the best literature. So let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that Ajahn Po would do as a teacher. The first time that I met him, I had been riding a bicycle from Bangkok down to Wat Suan Mok, but that was at a time when there wasn't even a good road. There was no electric power. There was a dirt road that was being constructed into a pavement, but a lot of the road was still a dirt road. And that when I got to Wat Suan Mok, standing at the gate at Wat Suan Mok was Ajahn Po. And he said to me something that really struck me. He says, "Where have you been? I have been waiting for you." Now, this is the first time I ever laid eyes on him. And I found out later, actually years later, when it came out, that he had been to Chumphon and was riding in a truck and passed by me riding a bicycle. And he assumed that the only place that a Westerner would be going on a bicycle heading south would be Wat Suan Mok. And so he made that assumption, and then it was late in the evening. It was about 7 o'clock. It was actually just dark sundown. And there he was standing. Actually, what had happened is I'd had a little bit of trouble with the bicycle. Spokes were breaking, and it was on its last legs. So immediately I became really attached to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. I was much more attached to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, Ajahn Po, than I was to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And Ajahn Po would always arrange time for me to be with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, where Bhikkhu Buddhadasa would teach. He spoke a little bit of English, and it was easy enough. But the real care that I received was from Ajahn Po. Now, one of the things that he would do, for one thing, he would put me way out in the back of the where the cooties were, out in the back in the forest area. And then he would come and visit me at random times throughout the day. And he would stand and wait for me to figure out that he was there. And what that did is it put me into a tune that if Aan Po is going to show up, I'm going to know it. That I would be waiting for him, expecting him to come, as opposed to him standing there for 20 minutes or half an hour waiting on me. Another thing that I remember was that he would bring food to me late in the morning, because he knew that as a new monk, I was not really ready to eat just one meal a day. So he was very kind that way. And then also one of the things that he would do would be that when I was out and about at a ceremony, or when there was a large crowd of people or whatever like that he would walk up behind me while I wasn't noticing that he was there and say something in passing. It was almost like whisper in my ear and then walk on by. And there were several things that he would say. And this really set it in for me. He was that kind of teacher. Instead of giving me a whole lot of words and a great big description about stuff, he would just use the same words, little words, over and over again. And two of the words that he would use was one, tatatha, which is basically translated into thusness. But basically what it actually means is be here now. And he was actually telling me, hey, if I could sneak up on you, you're not here. If I come close to you and you don't know it, you're not here now. And so that was basically a teaching, is to be aware when I'm around. Another thing that he would often say would be not sure. That in fact, that's the one that really got me, was that Aan Po would keep saying he's not sure and that I should not be sure. Everything is flux, everything is changing. The right way to live your life is to be alert, be awake, to be here now, to watch what's going on, and to not think that you know everything or anything at all. Also, being not sure is a comfortable place. And I see a lot of students who come and want to hear about the Dhamma, want to know how to practice. And the hallmark is that they keep asking questions. And I'll give them a little answer and I'll give them some information about how to practice. And then I'll ask another question and another question and another question. And really, they are not sure and they don't like it. What Bhikkhu Aan Po was teaching was to be in that state of being not sure, and that's a comfortable place to be. It's a comfortable place to not know, to make everything a game, everything a toy. There's no reason to have any worries or flurries. Everything is just easy going, even though we don't quite know what's going. So this is one of the most important teachings that I got from Aan Po. And that if I can depart that to the students, and I often do, by telling students that you don't need to know all of the answers to all of your questions, that's what you learned to do when you were in the Western culture. That the easy way to live one's life is just to practice correctly and stop asking so many questions. Now, that stop asking a lot of questions is different than letting go of questions, because if you let go of questions, they'll just keep coming back. They'll just keep coming back. You have to actively throw out your questions and come to the state of not knowing. I don't know, not sure. Who are you? I don't know, not sure. Changing target, moving target. Everything is just in flux. let's be comfortable with the fact that things are just happening and we don't even have to keep track of it all. This is the major teaching of the Buddha, and he didn't use very many words to portray that. But it did take me months to figure it out. I'm hoping that I can just tell it to you and you figure that out, that you don't have to figure anything out. All you have to know is that it's okay that you don't know, and everything is all right. But there's a few things that we should know, that we do need to know, and that would be the Four Noble Truths. If you understand the Four Noble Truths, if you can see what dukkha is right in front of you, then you have a choice and a chance to change it. Vic Buddhadasa and Aan Po were both very big on that, is to see what you're doing, come into the present moment, look at what's happening, and make a change for the better. These are actually the parts of the Eightfold Noble Path that anyone can practice. To wake up, to be here now, to take a look at what you're doing, to make a change. Brighten the mind, gladden the mind, change the thoughts from unwholesome thoughts to wholesome thoughts. And this is basically all the teaching of the Buddha right then and there. The Buddha says that he only taught one thing, and that is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. That's all there is to it. If you see the dukkha, throw it out. It's not a matter of letting go of it, because it's not going to go anywhere. You got to throw it out. Got to take the right effort. Now, this is an important point about taking the right effort, because let us say that you can get yourself into a good state. You can start saying, oh, everything is all right, everything is fine, not a worry in the world. And then something will happen and you'll go back and become disappointed again. An example of that is, yes, I feel satisfied, but not enough. I want more. Well, if you want more, then you're really not satisfied at all. Real satisfaction is when you're actually satisfied and things are good enough. And this is how we practice. We practice satisfaction, and satisfaction will grow. But if we practice satisfaction and are dissatisfied with the satisfaction right now, then we're continuing to practice what we've always practiced, and that is being disappointed with what we've got. So the right way to practice is everything right now is okay. Not a problem, not a worry in the world. Everything is all right. Ta-ta-ta, be here now. Not sure. Everything is in flux and I don't have to know. I can just be happy. These things took me years to learn, the Aan Po. He was very patient with me. So I'm hoping that I can make things easy for you, every one of you, so that you can get the point easily, rather than me sneaking up behind you and whispering in your ear. I can explain it to you just so that you know just enough explanation that, oh, you don't have to know everything. Just practice gladdening the mind. Just practice changing your attitude from the attitude of a loser to the attitude of a winner. That we are trained victims. Every human being that I've ever met has been a trained victim. We start off as a victim when we're a baby. When we're a young child, we're a victim of mommy. When we go to school, nobody wants to go to school. Maybe we like the idea of going to school and we're happy the first day of school. But after school becomes a grind, all the kids don't want to go to school, but they go anyway because they have to. They're victims of that school. And then we get victims of higher education. We get victimized by the jobs and the car and the house and the wife and all of the stuff that we have in our civilization, we still feel victims to it. And so we actually have to practice over and over again becoming a winner. I'm okay. I can handle that. And so if we actually have an unwholesome thought, something like, oh, well, I feel satisfied, but it's not enough satisfaction. Yes, I feel joy, but it's not enough joy. Okay, you see that and say, yes, there is enough joy. It may be a little bit of joy, but I've got joy right here, right now. That's the real teaching of the Buddha. And this was the point that Aan Po kept trying to get me to understand. That really there's not much practice. You can sit on the floor for hours and hours, and most of that time you're waiting for the bell to ring. You're not really satisfied. Can you actually spend your time being satisfied, even if you don't know all the answers? The only answers that you need is this dukkha? Am I causing myself dukkha? Am I causing my own disappointments? Am I causing my own discomforts? Am I causing my own fears? Because if I am, and I can see that, I can stop it. Ivan, you know that I've been talking about you some. That you keep coming back with question after question after question, and the answer is the questions are irrelevant. Just be happy.
I agree. Took me a while.
Mm-hmm. Adrian, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious. So when you have a lot of satisfaction, right? So will the awareness be higher, right? Will you like can you tell if somebody's picking up on your back with that?
I'm not sure I understand you.
I mean, you were explaining just now, right, about how Ajahn Po was sneaking up behind you, and and with that practice you increase your awareness. So will training to be more satisfied, will they help in raising awareness?
Michael, can you help me out with what he's saying?
Will training to be more satisfied help to increase awareness?
They go hand in hand directly. That in fact, you're probably not going to be satisfied unless you're already in the present moment. If you're thinking about the past, if you're thinking about the future, if you're not paying attention, if you're too busy reading a book, then you're probably in a state of dissatisfaction. You really have to come into the present moment to look at what's going on to be able to see that dissatisfaction so that you can change it.
That is interesting, because I mean, in my case, right, I can feel a lot of satisfaction internally, but then I would not have a lot of awareness outside, if you know what I mean.
Well, we really don't need awareness on the outside, but they both go hand in hand. And I would change the word awareness. That in fact, the word awareness is kind of a new agey Western Buddhism kind of word. I would call it instead wise attention. And that wise, right, noble effort is to pay attention, which is a much more active kind of thing. Awareness, in fact, is very much like lollygagging, where awareness is kind of goes hand in hand with the word letting go. Doesn't take much effort to let go. Doesn't take much effort to just be aware. But to be alert, to have to pay wise attention, to really look, to investigate, And in fact, the word investigate is probably even a better word to use, because everybody understands that investigate. An example would be that you can read a passage and you think that you know what it is, but if you go back and you really pick it apart and really look at it, you'll recognize that it was saying something actually quite different than what you originally thought when you were just merely aware. So aware is kind of the surface level, superfluous even. And we're talking about a deep paying attention, an absolutely deep investigation. But in fact, the novels Doyle wrote about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Wilson, I think it was. So Sherlock Holmes would go in and he would actually investigate. He would take out his magnifying glass and he would go over cigarette butts and he would really take a look at what was going on and put things together based upon the evidence that he found, while Dr. Watson would stand around and muse about it and say, oh, maybe they were doing this and oh, maybe they were doing that. So he was paying attention, or he was actually watching what was going on, where Sherlock Holmes was really digging into it. And this is what we really need to do with dukkha. We have to really get into it to see it, but only enough to identify it. We don't have to take it home and dissect it, which is what they do with the noting method in Mahasi. That in fact, the story that I like to tell about it is, imagine you're walking down the sidewalk, and as you're walking down the sidewalk, there is a dog turd, a pile of dog stuff right in front of you, about 10 feet ahead. All right. They have three kinds of meditation then. One kind of meditation is called choiceless awareness. There's that word awareness. So you're aware of that dog turd while you step right in it. And then there is the Mahasi noting method, which basically means you're going to pick up that dog turd, take it into your kitchen, and dissect it, powder it, oil it up, mix it with egg, slice it and dice it, and really get into the dukkha. All right? That's not quite liberating now, is it? That what we really need to do, the right thing to do, is when we're walking down that sidewalk and we see that pile of dog stuff, just step aside. Just take the right effort to get away from it. It's not a matter of letting go of it. It's a matter of actually directly taking the effort to avoid it. And this is what we would do then with unwholesome thoughts. So that walking down the sidewalk is basically what we're talking about in right, correct practice. Is when you see an unwholesome thought, don't keep it. Don't let it go. Actually actively avoid it. Throw it out. Step aside. Get out of its way. Change it from an unwholesome thought or from an unwholesome thought to a wholesome thought. So right noble effort is actually active. And you will get the good results. We have to gladden the mind or brighten the mind. It's not just a matter of telling ourselves everything is okay. You actually have to mean it. You have to see it in reality. The reality is that you're already okay. Can you see that? Can you really apply that you're already okay? That even though the dog turd is right there in your path, you're smart enough, you're wise enough, you're fast enough, you can see it and you can get out of its way. And if you could do that for your whole life and everything that happens, your life is going to become joyful. You're going to have a marvelous life. Anna, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, about the letting go, I just wanted to add something that is really helpful in my practice, and it can be considered as letting go. is breathing, because when you breathe out, I mean, when I catch the unwholesome thought, then I take a deep breath and then I breathe out, and it's like letting go,
Mm-hmm. Yes, that right noble effort actually has 4 qualities to it. It's called the Satipatthana, and you're mentioning that with the breath, is that we want to use the breath to actually relax the body. We want to use the breath to be able to see the tensions in the body so that we can relax them. We want also to use the breath to keep the mind focused. And so when you run across some practices, they say, don't try to change the breath, just watch it. Well, that means that you've got no skin in the game. That means you're not really watching it at all. That's kind of like letting go, or kind of like just awareness. You're aware of the breath, and then the mind's just going to put it right away. But if you can grab that breath, if you can actually manipulate it, if you can change the way you breathe, like Anna was talking just now, is to take a deep breath and let it out as a sigh of relief. This is the right practice. There was a set of movies. I think that there was 3 movies in a row, and the name of it always had to do with Kung Fu Panda. Does anybody remember any sequence of movies about the Kung Fu Panda? All right. In the middle one, the Kung Fu Panda recognized that the noodle merchant, the duck, was not his dad. That the dad, the noodle duck, actually helped teach him kung fu with his master by throwing food in the air, and the master would catch it before the Kung Fu Panda would. And so the Kung Fu Panda actually learned how to do all the kung fu movements by being able to grab the chicken ball or whatever it was that his dad was throwing. All right. But in the middle movie, he actually meets his real father, a real panda bear. And he went home with him. And what his dad taught him was remarkable. He taught him how to sigh. He taught him how to sigh. There's a scene where they're sitting in a beautiful mountain area up well high in the air, and the Kung Fu Panda is trying to sigh. Oh, and his dad says, no, you got to do it this way. Oh. All right. So I bring that up because of what Anna's talking about is you actually have to practice breathing out. You have to practice sighing in order to be able to relax the body. And so begin to practice that. Begin to practice by taking in a deep breath and then sighing with relief. Oh, just letting go, just relaxing. Everything is okay. Everything is fine. And so the breathing really is an important point. But we need to practice sighing. We need to practice that out breath. We need to practice that in breath so that we can get it down to where it actually does fit in with the rest of the practice. So if we can take an unwholesome thought and change it to a wholesome thought, if we can take an unwholesome attitude, a victim's attitude, and change it to a wholesome attitude, and we can change an unwholesome feeling like fear, annoyance, anxiety, frustration, anger, and change that into a happy feeling like everything is okay, then doing this kind of breathing really helps those other 3 things. So changing our thought, changing our attitude, changing our feelings, and changing our breath. All four of these things is actually the teaching of the Buddha, to come out of our dissatisfaction and come into a relaxed, happy state. Adrian, you got your hand up again. Go ahead.
I'm wondering, will you consider daydreaming as unwholesome or as having unwholesome thoughts?
I'm sorry, what kind of thought?
Would you consider daydreaming as having unwholesome thoughts? Daydreaming.
Well, yes, because daydreaming, you're not in the present moment. And you could be daydreaming about strangling your teacher. You could be daydreaming about robbing a bank. So daydreaming in and of itself, I don't know. I'm not sure about daydreaming. It could be wholesome or it could be unwholesome. Normally, though, that if you're not daydreaming, you're paying attention. Let us say that you're daydreaming, not particularly unwholesome. You're not daydreaming about harming somebody, but while you're daydreaming, the robber stands up behind you, puts a gun in your back, and wants your money because you weren't watching. Daydreaming means that you're not paying attention. Paying attention. You might have been aware that the guy was behind you, but you need to pay attention to what he's doing. The same thing with a snake. You can be kind of aware that the snake is there, but you might get bit while you're daydreaming, perhaps about snakes. So I would not recommend daydreaming, nor would I say that they're wholesome in particular. And what we can say is that while you are daydreaming, you're not really paying attention to what's really going on. That in fact, almost all daydreaming is a kind of a desire. You're daydreaming about going to the island because night here is not good enough. What's wrong with right here, right now? This is paradise. We've already got everything that we need. Why should I go daydream about some runway girl? Everything is already okay. So, Ben, do you have any questions about this?
Nothing that comes to mind currently. Everything sort of ties in with other things that I've listened to and heard. It's a bit more. It seems a bit more of an active stance though than I listen to a lot of stuff by Aan Po Semedo, and he sort of. I'm not sure if it's just like the way that your approach just seems a lot more active. Like everything's more active rather than being a bit more passive and sort of recognizing things but allowing them to be instead of doing something about them. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say so. Yes, it's very active. Be here now is an effort. Because if we're very passive, we will just passively pass away. Go off someplace else. Start daydreaming. But if we're taking the right noble effort, that means that we're actually paying attention. That's the right noble effort, is to pay attention to what's happening. Notice what's going on. Thomas, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Elite level athletes will use visualization often, right? To imagine themselves, the 100 meters runner, before he runs the race, he's visualizing how he's going to feel in that moment, etc., etc. Now, I know that everything you've talked about is discouraging us from that, right? It's all about recognizing the goodness in this moment. Is there any, if you're worried about, there's something important, you need to do whatever. You've got a job interview tomorrow, or you've got something, right? That is there any role at all for some kind of preparing in the present moment, which
Yes.
will make you feel more secure in a future event?
It's really okay that you mentioned that in fact it gives the opportunity to start talking about the middle path. The Buddha was really, really big on the middle path, and often the way that I state it, people get the idea that I'm going into an extreme. All right. That in fact, there's a whole lot of practices that have to do with timing. So if the sportsman is thinking about throwing that javelin while he's taking a leak, he may piss all over his feet. But if he is planning on that and he's got that javelin in his hand and he is making the wise attention, planning his shot and making it, because he's still right here in the present moment. And he's got the confidence that he's going to throw that javelin. So in a way, this is what we're talking about, is that sports people actually are successful at their sport because they are doing their sporting right here, right now. As opposed to the nerd who is dreaming about throwing a javelin, pissing on his foot. So you can actually take the time to figure stuff out. We can mull it over. We can figure it. In that way, it's not necessarily daydreaming. So you could say that observation, taking, in fact, Ajahn Sumedho uses the word wise reflection. So in the case of throwing that javelin, Ajahn Sumedho was talking about the wise reflection of reflecting about what we're about to do and then doing it, as opposed to unwise reflection is just pissing and moaning about what happened last week. Oh, I missed that throw. Oh, poor me. And now the javelin thrower is thinking about his failures rather than planning on this next moment, this throw, this is about to happen. He's in the process of it. So this is a good point. And we can mention this in the sense of the middle path, because the middle path is always in the present moment, to where the future is one extreme and the past is the other extreme. And so let's spend this present moment of figuring out what we're about to do and then do it well, do it wisely, because we're reflecting upon it. Ivan, you got your hand up.
Yes, Dhammarato. I'm just asking, is there a middle path when it comes to intellectualization of the Dharma? I know that intellectualization always doesn't work well, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, here's the easy way. You can intellectualize about being enlightened, which means that you want to be enlightened. Or you can stop intellectualizing about being enlightened and just feel enlightened. You're already there. Yeah, intellectualization actually is the forerunner. Like, for instance, we intellectualize, oh, I should pay attention. And then we pay attention. So we think about it first and then do it if we're doing it wisely. But oftentimes our thoughts slip right by. We're not paying wise attention to our thoughts. And intellectualization actually is in that same area, is just watching or awareness, or as Ben was talking about, just letting go. No, it's not a letting go, it's a throwing out. It's an active job. to actively change your mind, put it into a good state. Yes,
Throwing
Kat.
out
Oh,
your, sorry.
who's that?
It also feels like intellectualization isn't really in the present. Like it feels like the present, but it kind of, from my experience, if I pay close attention, intellectualization doesn't really feel like in the present. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. All right. Here's an example then, is that the carpenter can intellectualize about this piece of wood and what it's going to look like. But what he really needs to do is not intellectualize about what the whole thing is going to look like. He needs to intellectualize about what this particular turn is doing right here. What am I doing with that chisel right now? So an artist can have the entire thing like a horse splashing in water. They've got that, but he actually has to pay attention to every stroke that he's taking. He can't just intellectualize about having a horse splashing in water and actually have the horse splashing in water. He's got to actually pay attention to every detail. So that's how we're going to learn to live our lives. We can't just plan off in the future, oh, someday I'm going to be happy. It's let's do it right now. Let's take that brushstroke towards happiness right now. So there's a balance in there. There is a middle path there that if you only think about how that horse splashing is going to look, you'll never get it done. Also, if you're paying close attention to every little line you draw, you may be drawing cat whiskers. So you actually need both of them. You need to have that little intellectual plan about where this is going, but you got to watch every little step along the way. Pay close attention to it. So it's a balance. And the reality is that the important one is every little step that you're taking, what you're happening right here, right now. That's where we're spending about 90% of the time. That image about what is going to be someday is not really all of that important. What's really is important is what we're doing right now. Let's pay close attention to that. So I see a lot of smiling and nodding. I see some Thomas's. How about you, Ben? You beginning to get some of this?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's going in.
Great. So Anna, how about you? Got any last things to add?
Sorry. Yeah. I just wanted to say that yes, it's a really active process, as it's like at each moment you see the unwholesome, you catch it, and then you throw the trash away. So you're always throwing the trash away.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that you say that in a podcast with Guru Viking once, and
Kat, do you have anything to add?
Nothing really comes to mind, but it's a very satisfying skill to develop and see things and see how it all rolls along, practicing. It's really satisfying itself.
Excellent. So, anybody got any last words?
One short question, Dhammarato. Maybe two, depending on your answer. Can you hear me?
Yes, David, go ahead. I'm trying to find out who's talking.
Oh, sorry.
I got you now. Okay, David, what's happening?
So I often hear you say that Ajahn Po instructed you to exclusively teach the Dhamma at the noble level, right?
Yes.
Not to fall back to the ordinary. I wonder, was that also true for himself as well and Buddhadasa? Would they not ever teach on the ordinary level?
Actually, that would be correct. That was part of the problem that Vic Buddhadasa had all along, was that the lay people would want him to teach at their level, and he wouldn't teach at the level of ordinary people. He always taught about freedom. He taught about you can see it in some of the books that have been published from his talks, like No Religion, Dhammic Socialism. I mean, those are fighting words for Westerners.
It's interesting because I was reading Handbook for Mankind, and it has a lot of ordinary stuff in it. Like, he talks about realms, rebirth, like the ordinary rebirth. He talks about morality as like coming first before samadhi and wisdom.
Gosh, it's been so many years since I've read the Handbook to Mankind. I don't remember any of that kind of stuff in there.
Yeah, even talks about the stuff from the Vadi Maga, like the 16 stages of insight. There's even a chapter dedicated to like the stages of insight, the 7 purifications, the 5 stages in Vipassana. It seems lots of ordinary stuff.
Well, thanks for the reminder. I'll get the old book out. It's actually on our website. All of that stuff is on the website.
Yeah.
What about his book on ABC of Buddhism?
ABCs of Buddhism.
Have you read it?
Yet to read that one. Haven't read that yet.
Well, it's quite typical for people who are teaching at the ordinary level to never get into the supramundane. They stay at the mundane. People expect them to be at the mundane. But the Buddha taught the mundane in order to help the student get over it so that they could get into the supramundane. But Ajahn Po has given me the instructions. You teach at the supramundane. There's enough students out there who will get it. But we can start with the good stuff. We don't have to wade through all of the children's literature in order to get to the adult comics. But the normal.
It's a pretty.
Go ahead.
It's a pretty old book. I think
yes,
it's from lectures in 1956.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, because as Vic Buddhadasa grew older, he got more and more into the supramundane and staying there. So it's good that you're mentioning that, because I do know from other literature that he did teach it at the ordinary level. An example of that is that there are 4 books on Anapanasati, and that the oldest one was done from the 1950s, to where there he was talking about quite a lot of the stuff that he talked about. Actually, he got out of the Visuddhimagga. But in his later life, he didn't teach out of the Visuddhimagga anymore. He got closer and closer to the actual noble teaching. And so it's interesting that you're saying that the Handbook to Mankind is actually that old. 70 years. That's interesting. I'll have a look at the Handbook to Mankind. Anybody, by the way, who wants it, it's actually on our website. And it's available to anyone. All you have to do is go to the resource section and pick on the PDF files, and it'll show up. So, David, thank you so much for bursting my bubble. Not sure. That would be the right way to say it. I'm not sure about what Vic Buddhadasa always taught. I'm only sure about what I've gotten from him. Yes, Ben, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I sometimes find myself sort of reading widely, like Dhamma books and listening to Dhamma talks. And sometimes it sort of feels like that in itself is me just distracting myself or trying to like fill my time with something. I wonder like how much emphasis should there be on like reading and listening to talks compared to just being here now, like without any sort of distractions, even if it's learning something that's positive, but also, is it also a distraction? I don't know.
Well, let's look at it from two perspectives. And the first perspective is the middle path. Always find the middle path. There's always a balance between this and that. The second way to look at it is that as we progress in our practice of the Dhamma, we get more and more and more interested in the Dhamma and less interested in the ordinary world. But that doesn't mean that we leave the ordinary world completely behind. Okay, so it's like you've got two items of food on your plate, and you recognize that one of them is really wholesome, one of them is really healthy, the other one is sweet and tastes good. How are we going to proceed? The ignorant ones are going to go after the food that tastes good and ignore the food that's healthy. But a wise person will go for the healthy food first, and then later, if he still wants it, he'll go after the sweet, delicious. But there's always a balance. There's both sides.
Okay.
So when I would recommend that people start with 6 times a day, 5 or 10 minutes at a time, a lot of people will hear, oh, you got to do it 100% of the time, all the time. You can't do anything but Dhamma. Well, that there will come a time for people. In fact, the ones who have Dhamma all the time and nothing else, that's what would be called a sotapan, a real sotapan, one who has nothing else but Dhamma on his mind. But nobody's going to start off like that. But there's a difference between all Dhamma all the time and no Dhamma ever. And we all start off with no Dhamma ever. Let's go find a balance. As we're balancing for the moment, we'll go in the direction of all Dhamma all the time. And so everything is a moving target. Nothing is fixed. There's no one straight answer to anything. All right. So, Thomas, got our time for another question?
Yeah, sorry, very quick. I think I know the answer, but it's something I thought about. I think it connects to Ben's question. I've actually got really into your teachings, and I find that I'm listening to a lot of the audios, like pretty much every day I'm listening to a new talk. And it does sometimes get me thinking, am I almost overdoing this, right? Am I listening to too much Dharma? whereas I should be just practicing, right? And that I'm almost like a bit too, you know, because the teachings inspire me, and the way I justify it to myself is they inspire me to practice, and then I'm more likely to practice. So I think I've got a good balance. I think it's the middle path, but I wonder if that's the question Ben was kind of alluding to, is like,
find a good balance point, right? So the balance would be sometimes we're doing actual practice. Sometimes we're doing some reading. Sometimes we're off at the zoo. But most of the world is off at the zoo. Some people get too deep into practice, but generally what happens is people get too deep into the literature and don't practice. This is the translators. They're all translators all the time. So we have now a balance. Let's find a good balance. And always you can tell how is the balance? Is the answer to that is I feel good. That's the balance. Is yeah, this is great. When we're out of balance, we want the other. Yeah, this is good, but I want the other. And then when you're in the other, yeah, but I want that first thing too. So let's keep that idea of the middle path and progression and balance. But always keep in mind that the Eightfold Noble Path is about doing it right now. The Four Noble Truths is really about, can you come out of your dukkha right now? Can you come out of it right now? Whatever you got on your mind, if it's dukkha, can you see that dukkha and throw it out? You can do that whether you're eating food or watching TV or doing code or walking down the street or changing a flat tire or clobbering one of your opponents in a chess game. Whatever you're doing, can you remember that you're the boss? You're okay. And a good way of talking about it is that if you let somebody else win, you're the real winner. So let somebody else win. You don't have to be the winner of every game you play. Find a balance in your life so that you have happiness. Anybody got any last questions? All right. Well, let's go ahead and finish this talk up now. Thank you very much. This has been good. I especially want to thank David. Busted my chops. I like that. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Anna, bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, bye, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.